Hello and welcome to the Museums Association's online annual conference. We're hosting a session this afternoon with Tamsin Russell from the Museums Association called Workforce Wellbeing at a Time of Uncertainty. Before I hand over to Tamsin, I've just got a few housekeeping announcements to make. Firstly, as attendees, your cameras and microphones should be automatically disabled, but you can use the chat function on your menu bar to talk to introduce yourselves, talk to others, share links and experiences. And of course, you can tweet using the hashtag Museums2020. There is live closed captioning available at the bottom of your Zoom screens, as well as audio describing via the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen too. Just switch to the French channel for live description. If you have a question that you'd like Tamsin to address, then please share via the Q&A, and I'll pose some questions once she's finished sharing her slides and talking through them. And then please share your name and organisation. You can leave and rejoin the webinar at any time, and we're recording the discussion today, and it will be available on our website in due course. Finally, please bear with us if there are any technical hitches. And do message me privately if you have any trouble. Right now, I'll hand you over to Tamsin to get started. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eleanor. I've got some slides that I want to share just to enable you to not only be thinking and listening, but also to be focusing on what you can be doing. At the end of the session, if you want to get copies of the slides, really happy to send you the slides with a little bit more detail on them. So my name's Tamsin Russell. I lead on workforce at the Museums Association. And as part of that, I am developing a wellbeing strategy for our members and the sector. And the title of this session is Workforce Wellbeing at a Time of Uncertainty, which is perhaps apt, given that the description on the website is now out of date for many following Saturday's announcement. My reflection is that we're living in a fast lane and we're in heavy fog. So what I hope to do over the course of the time we have together is to provide you with opportunities to reflect on your own particular situation, and it will be specific to you. This is an in practice session, so we will be focusing on some practical considerations, some hints and some hacks to help you think about how you navigate uncertainty and what it means. So I'll be posing you some questions as we go through, really just to illustrate what you might want to be thinking about in terms of helping yourself. It's important to note that wellbeing has been part of the museum sector agenda for a long time, but in my experience, it has been primarily focused outwardly to our audiences and the communities we served. It's not, in my experience, always necessarily been mirrored internally. We know that organisations have a duty of care for their staff and their volunteers. But in this session, our particular focus is us as individuals, because not everybody is currently working in a museum. Not everybody works in a museum and has those supporting mechanisms if you're a freelancer, for example. So let me show you my slides and we'll get started. So what we're going to do over the course of the next 20 minutes is talk about some definitions. I'm going to get you to begin to think about sources of uncertainty in your own life, also factors affecting your well-being. So this is very much, as I said, individually focused. I then want to sort of talk about some of the individual differences that are in play that may affect how we respond to different situations, which may well explain why I'm sitting here thinking this is fantastic, for example, but somebody next to me is not and has been wobbled by everything that's going on. I'm going to talk about some hints and hacks and give you some tools and techniques, and then we will close for questions. My alarm will go off actually in 15 minutes, and then we'll pause for questions. So that's what we're going to go through today. So I love definitions, so it sort of gives you an indication of the foundations and how I deal with uncertainty, but this is always my go-to. So in terms of a definition around uncertainty, it is doubt about the future or what is the right thing to do. And I think we can all agree at the moment, it's both of those things at this point in time. Some of the things I want you to start thinking about, and by all means, please feel free to write notes down as we're going through this, is to begin to think about these questions. So what is it that is making you feel uncertainty? Where is that coming from? Because it will be different from all of us. So, for example, it could be financial uncertainty, it could be risk of redundancy, it might come from very different places. And being able to know where those sources of uncertainty are coming from enable us, when we get to the sessions around tools or techniques, to take very clear and considered action. What I should say within all of this is I do not have a magic wand of certainty, but what I hope to do is to support you all the way through this. Another exercise that you can do to begin to feel more grounded and more stable whilst we're in this time of flux is also to think about what is certain for you, if there is such a thing. So beginning to list what it is that you can rely on enables you often to think and be able to deal with or cope with those areas that you don't feel you have as much certainty over. And when I talk about certainty, I will generally begin to morph into the concept of control as well, because they really go hand in hand in the current situation. So again, if you've been thinking around where your feelings of uncertainty have come from, by all means take some notes. We're not going to be sharing any of this information. The other thing you can start thinking about is where are you? Where do you have certainty? What is in place for you? Because that's an important balance to be struck. So I said I'm really focused on definition. So let's look at another definition, which is around well-being. So well-being, so a nice definition of this is a state of being comfortable, healthy and happy. So it's quite holistic in its approach. Other definitions talk about being in a good or satisfactory, that doesn't sound great, does it? A good or satisfactory condition of existence. And that relates again to health, happiness or prosperity. So some of the other things that you can be doing is thinking about your sense of well-being and most particularly how it is fluctuating. So what factors are affecting your well-being? Where do they sit? And equally, how they might be changing are two important exercises to enable you to navigate with purpose where you are experiencing uncertainty and where it's having an impact on your well-being. And the reason I say with purpose is the reason that this could be more helpful by having structured questions is it stops you going through that constant loop. Something that I do often is I just go through a constant loop of thinking and expending energy throughout the day, and most often waking up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my goodness. By going through questions in a structured way, by capturing your thoughts and your feelings, absolutely frees up space for you to be able to process other things. It gets it down on paper. It enables you to look at it with distance. And I mean that literally as well as figuratively. So doing a structured approach around asking yourself some of these questions can absolutely help. And that rating your well-being is really, really powerful because it enables you to look at any trends that might occur. And we'll talk about keeping records later on. But certainly from my perspective, I know that during the course of lockdown, I have taken a record or put in my diary for 2021. It has to be used for something about when I felt wobbled or discombobulated. And for me, being able to then look back to say, you know, was there a trend? Was there a trigger around something that was affecting my well-being? Where was it coming from? Was it coming from within my role, within my organisation? Was it coming from outside? Usually it was when there was an announcement from Westminster or Holyrood. So being able to rate your well-being and understanding where your baseline well-being is usually, and then how you might fluctuate, can be really, really helpful to help you make sense of uncertainty and well-being. And by able to do that, it enables you to think about how you're going to address it. So I want to now sort of move on to individual differences. And the first thing I want to talk about really in terms of how it affects our concept of uncertainty is our own personal experience, our own previous experience, our lived experience. Often when we talk about uncertainty, it is viewed through a negative lens. but there is certainly not always the case. Often people think you can't thrive in a situation of uncertainty and ambiguity, but that isn't the reality for lots of people. So if you are one of those people that feels able to operate in a space of not knowing or in a space of ambiguity, then I'd really urge you to own it and capitalize on it whilst it lasts. I am sort of one of those people. And it was interesting for me when I was reflecting on this content that I don't tend to use the word uncertainty in my everyday life. It's not a word I use. Uh, um, and I think that's because I've never really thought that anything was certain. And from my own sort of upbringing, you know, I've divorced parents, I've experienced loss at a fairly early age. I studied science at university. All of those things have always led me to believe that things are quite fluid, things are quite dynamic, there is flux. And those are the words I tend to use. So for me, the situation that we're in at the moment doesn't feel as alien as it might do for other individuals, whereas I've never had a sense of certainty. And certainly through the conversations I've had of people that have also worked during uncertain times within the sector through previous austerity measures or previous significant changes in policy or government, for example, that sort of stoicism that comes from having lived experience around what has happened. So comes through quite strongly. They are just sort of slightly more matter of fact about things, which you can understand. Equally, for those of you that have gone through significant periods of uncertainty, and you may well be mindful of the potential impact of what is going on at the moment, that can give you a real sense of potential consequence. And therefore, you may well be feeling this uncertainty even more strongly. For those of you that have, in the course of your career, in the course of your life, had lots of certainty, the fact that we are now in a situation of uncertainty might have a bigger impact. So the question here really is just to reflect on what your lived experience is in terms of what is a certainty or not, and living within a space of ambiguity, because that will dictate how you are currently coping with or responding to the situations you find yourself in. Locus of control is one of my favourite theories when I studied psychology, and if you haven't come across it, it can really help you navigate your own responses, but also try to make sense of other people's responses, and not just during a global pandemic, I should say, but during normal working relationships. So locus of control was a theory proposed by a psychologist called Julian Rotter, and his theory was around how to explain responses to the outside world. And he proposed that there are two ways of responding, because we have two different types of control. We either have an internal locus of control, which means that we have a sense that we can absolutely shape and inform our own destinies, or whether we have an external locus of control, whereby we feel things are done to us. Again, it's really interesting in the current situation around how our own preferred locus of control plays out. So I have something which is called an internal locus of control, which I've alluded to. So I absolutely believe anything that I do should have an impact on what I experience and the successes I experience. I very rarely blame others. I internalize when things don't go right or wrong. What that means in a global pandemic, though, unfortunately for me, means that having that control moved away from me, having that ability to affect change, means that I might feel these imposed changes far more strongly. Whereas if you've got an external locus of control and you often feel that what you are doing is beyond your control anyway, the global pandemic may certainly resonate more with your own personal experience. So thinking around how you might feel about the extent to which you have control is a nice way of thinking about whether you've got an internal or external locus. You know, so if you never think you have control, or rarely, sometimes it depends, majority, or always, I've not even put always on there, always have control. You know, if you're at the always camp, you're more of an internal. If you're a never camp, you're more of an external, and that has an impact on how you navigate what we're experiencing. The other thing I think is really important to highlight is personal context. And what I mean by that is often when we talk about uncertainty, and of course in this setting, we are focusing primarily on the concept of work. But as we all know, our lives are not easily packaged into work and to home. And in a way, actually, using that binary terminology is not helpful. It doesn't adequately reflect the complexity of our personal context. It also elevates the amount of time and investment we might think about work, you know, from 37 hours traditionally to 84. You know, how is that helpful? How I like to explore our own personal context is by thinking about our life domains rather than just our work domains. And I think about 4 of these areas. So there's something around self, so your own sense of self, your sense of identity, and people within our sector, that often is very inextricably linked into our own sense of work and professional identity, which is why when we're experiencing change, when we're experiencing uncertainty, it almost has a double whammy, it has a double hit. So thinking around yourself, you're thinking about your work domain, your professional identity. You might also think of a relationship or relationships that are significant to you, and then also family, however you define it. Because during the course of 164 hours, I have to share myself out across all of these life domains. So if I'm only focusing on my own work domain, I'm actually ignoring 3/4 of myself. And so this is important because to appreciate how those sorts of uncertainty, those factors affecting your well-being operate across all of these domains is really important because they interact. There is push and pull between all of these. There is flow between all of these. So I might have something going on in my family life that leaches in to my work life. And that is a reality of being a human being. And I think what's really important at the current point in time is acknowledging that there may well be far more seepage, far more fluidity between all of these domains whilst we work from home, whilst we deal with a whole raft of things that we've never dealt with before. So understanding this is important. I want to now think about how we can work and navigate through all of this in the time that we have together. So other than looking at those pushes and pulls, what can we actually do? So my and hints start first of all with a statement really. Everything we're going to talk about here contributes to your personal resilience. And I'm always really clear when I talk about resilience is that it should not be worn as a badge of honor, but it is a skill set that you can develop. And it is a skill set that will enable you to cope in the short term with things that you are unexpectedly exposed to, but also it'll enable you to control in the long term your areas of work and life and play. So first of all, in terms of reflection, and we've already started talking about those exercises really, is, you know, really understanding the underlying issues to the sources of uncertainty, being able to know why we're feeling this way and how we're feeling. So some of you may well have come across the image that's next to me. I'm sure my audio describers are describing it well, even though it's teeny weeny, it's illustrative purposes only. It's an emotion wheel. The emotion wheel captures all the emotions that we can possibly experience as human beings. It is a really good document. It's a really good technique if you are finding it hard to articulate or to understand why you were feeling in a particular way, to look at the detail, the nuance, the complexity of the emotions that we experience as human beings. It enables you then to understand where you are, articulate to others that can support you, including your line managers or other peer support networks. It also enables you to keep that record that I've talked about, that enables you to do some trend analysis. Decreasing uncertainty is obviously the game and the goal for all of us. I'm not sure how realistic that is, but how can we do that? So if it is an issue of not having enough information, let's ask questions. If it is around the fact that we don't cope well without being kept in the loop, that's certainly something that resonates with me. I need to, you need to inform your managers and the people around you that transparency in information and decision making is important to you. That's something that absolutely supports your well-being. You don't want people to make assumptions on your behalf about whether you can cope with the information or not. You want to be able to tell them that you will make that decision if it's not their decision to make. You might also want to learn from others, those that are ahead of the curve. What have they gone through? How can they help you? What hints and tips can they share? You might also want to do some horizon scanning, so looking to the future, that longer lens. So often people are familiar with aspects around SWOT analysis or also pestle analysis. So we're looking forward in the future. Just bear with me, there's a tiny bit of noise. A perfect BBC link of how home life can affect work life. So decreasing uncertainty by doing some horizon scanning around what is going on politically, economically, socially, technologically, all of those aspects can enable you to be better placed, even though it is a little bit of a crystal ball, around what might be coming along. Taking control is important. I've got a photograph of a donut here, and that's not because I'm hungry, but it might well be. But this is a really nice technique around identifying what is within your direct control, the hole in the middle, what is in your less control, but in more of your influence. And then on the outside of that donut, that pretty glaze and beyond is what is outside of your control. Being able to look at this and to map those uncertainties and those factors around well-being can really, really help you to work out what you can invest your time and energy on and what you can't. And as part of that, an acceptance of what you can and can't control, which is hugely positive in terms of thinking about how you proceed. Decision making is important. So as part of this, in my last few minutes, is being informed enough to be able to make really strong decisions, and knowing that the decision that you make at this current point in time with the information that you have is the best decision you can make. I've had conversations with people recently who have made decisions and have said, as a function of the global pandemic, if only I had known. But the reality is you can't know. Even if you've done all of that reflection, even if you've done all of that horizon scanning, you can't always be in possession of all of the facts, because we're changing so quickly. We're in that fast lane, we're in that fog, and only some of these hints and tips can be fog lights for us. There's also something around accepting that a decision can be made at last rather than at first, and that's fine. I had a conversation with somebody last week that said about career progression. Oh, I'm waiting to see what happens, if a new job will come up or if my line manager will leave. All of those things I'm sure we've talked about in our own heads. I'm playing a waiting game, and this person was quite apologetic about it. You've made a decision, you've worked out what's important to you, you're now taking action. Keeping moving is important, certainly around those of you that are thinking, well, what does this uncertainty mean for my career specifically? And if you're around at this time tomorrow, we're doing a career crossroads workshop, and we'll be talking about that more so. But keeping moving, keeping that direction, that movement, that progression, that achievement is all energizing and important. And finally, what you would expect wherever there is something around well-being is something around self-care. So this is certainly not actual footage of me at all, but whether it is around exercise, whether it is about volunteering or community work, whatever it might be, being kind to yourself and appreciating where you are currently functioning in a current global pandemic is important. Please cut yourself some slack, just like the slack we'd cut everyone else that we work with. And on that point, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And I think we've probably just got about 8 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. That was so thoughtful and so important, because certainly from having been on furlough myself, and especially knowing the passion that everybody has in the sector, when I wasn't allowed to work, I was like, who am I? What do I have to do? And it's really difficult to sort of understand where you're going to go with that. And then I've thrown myself back into my job, but of course I've lost control of my weight. And then you think, oh, I'm so pleased to work again. But then you think, well, when do I stop work? You know, when do I actually look after myself? When do I go for my couch to 5K run? So all of this is so essential to keep on top of at the moment. So we have a few questions in the Q&A. First of all, from Megan Schlanker. Are you aware of the mental health first aid? And if you are, what do you think about it as a tool for ensuring well-being in the workplace, especially right now?
Well, I think I welcome the commitment to mental first aid, because I think what it does do is it highlights very clearly that we are whole beings, and it's not necessarily about whether I've scratched myself or whether I've hurt myself physically, but the impact that my psychological well-being and my mental health has on my ability to work, and also the responsibility, I should say, of the organisation to make sure they're not compromising that as well in terms of their duty of care. I think the word and I am a bit of a word freak, is the concept of ensuring. So I do think we need to remember that we operate within organisations and outside of organisations. So that whole concept of life domain, I think, is important, because there are pushes and pulls from both organisational experiences as well as experiences outside of the workplace. I also think it's important not to put an undue burden on those individuals that are mental health first aiders. It is not their responsibility, either on behalf of the organisation or the individual, to take that burden on. In a way, that's an additional pressure and demand that would be have a significant potential impact on them as well. So I think in principle it's a good thing, because we're holistic beings. I think we need to ensure that we remember there's work and outside of work, and both have a play on our mental health. And I think we need to be very mindful that those individuals who are mental health first aiders within your workplaces are human beings in their own right. They have attended training, but that there is a line at which that training stops.
I completely agree. And then we've got a really thoughtful question, and I've certainly had lots of people around me struggling or in very difficult positions. So Claire asks, what advice do you have, and do you have any advice as to how we can support others who are struggling during this time?
I think that's really good, and that's my first point of advice would be never give advice. No, so actually that is part of it, but I think the first thing really is to acknowledge those individual differences. My lived experience is not other people's lived experience. What has helped me may not have helped them, and I think what's important is to ask them what they need from you, but more importantly as well is to let them know that you're there. So if you can let know somebody that you're there for them when you need them, and reiterate that, because when you are in a situation where you need most help, you are often in the least strong situation to ask for it. So keep looking for those signs. If you see somebody who has been gregarious and been outwardly excitable all the time, and then you suddenly see a change, then that's an indicator that something is changed and wrong. So they're just checking in. And I often do that. I was at a meeting recently and somebody just was quite quiet in comparison to how they've been before. So I just sent an email, said, look, you were quite quiet. Is there anything I can help you with? So I think there's something around following up in an open way, but remembering that they are different to you and not to be prescriptive, because you can't possibly understand their full life domains.
I think that's really important, and it's just about, you know, we've been very good at the Museums Association. We're so lucky, but we've kept on sort of checking in. Are you okay? Like, what's going on? But I've also sort of just kept on talking to my mum literally every day, because otherwise sometimes I don't have a meeting scheduled. So who do I talk to? Because I live on my own. And so I sort of tried to reiterate this a little bit so that people understand this. But obviously that's just me. And you know, you've got a family, Tamsin, and lots of other people are in very, very different situations from there too. We've just got one more question come in from Shari. With financial uncertainty being a huge burden for many of us now, what can you recommend for volunteers or those of us looking to further our career to remain positive and stay resilient?
Gosh, that's a long question to answer in 30 seconds, and I'm not going to do it justice, but I can, if you can capture that, I can tweet about it afterwards. I think my reflection is this is a long game. So I think there is a reality check that the situation that we're in at the moment may last for a wee while. And by wee while, I mean, 18 months, 2 years in terms of recovery. That has tended to be what has happened in previous times where there have been significant austerity measures and recessions. But of course, this is the unknown, so we don't know. But usually it's 18 months to 2 years. I think we need to think about our working life. I am working until I'm going to be 67, 68. So it is a long game. If the sector is for you and you want it to be for you, you may have to take a step out and earn money elsewhere, but then remain afoot in another camp until the sector is recovered. And this and more is covered by our 2 Facebook groups that we run, which is all around managing in crisis for those of you that are managers, leaders or supervisors, or for those of you like Eleanor who was furloughed. Our MA Workforce COVID support group is a group that gets daily information to help. So more, if you like this, follow us there as well.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. As she's said, I've captured those questions that we haven't been able to ask live. And I think that's all we have time for right now. So I'm just going to say thank you, Tamsin. Thank you to everyone who's attended. And there's now a short 15-minute break to make another cup of tea before the session From an Era of Change into a Change of Era, Latin America Reimagines Museums, which begins at 5:30. Thank you again, everybody, and see you there. Bye for now.
See you soon. Thanks very much.